Welcome back everybody to another episode of Direct Comparison. For today's episode, we're going to be directly comparing various graphical details in Need for Speed Payback to Ubisoft's newest open world racing game, The Crew 2. Now before we get started, both games are being run on a PC, with the settings cranked up to their highest values at a 1440p resolution. We're going to try and match up the vehicle types, colors, and time of day, but due to Need for Speed Payback not featuring an easy way to adjust the time of day, there will be some slight variation. We'll be using the photo modes for both games to get some of the close-up shots, but we'll also be using some standard gameplay footage as well. To keep this simple, we're going to run through some very basic graphical elements, including texture quality, lighting, environmental detail, and special effects. So to kick this off, we'll start by looking at some car model and texture comparisons. The first vehicle here is the Ford Fusion RS with a matte orange finish. The matte finish in The Crew 2 appears a bit glossier than in Need for Speed, reflecting a bit more light, despite both images being taken around the same time based on the position of the sun in the game world. The models themselves look practically identical, with every detail where it should be, and with some decent anti-aliasing effects and mostly high-quality textures. The same is true for the McLaren P1, with a white clear coat in a forested location. These images really show the strange, warm color temperature in The Crew 2, and how it really can hurt the overall image quality. And again, both images are taken around midday. The bloom effect almost seems blown out in The Crew 2, which hides a bit of the finer details on the body of the car. And finally, we have a metallic dark blue Mustang on the streets of Vegas. Here's where you start to see some better reflective surfaces on the body of the car for The Crew 2, and we'll talk about that more soon. Moving on from vehicles, let's look at environmental textures. First, we have the road. The road at first glance looks much more realistic in Need for Speed Payback, but when viewed up close, the textures look very low res. The Crew 2's roads technically have a higher resolution, but the shader used on them makes each road appear like it's made of plastic. The grass textures look fine in both games, and it was difficult to find a similar patch of dirt to compare. They both feature some unique details, and a few grass sprites to help add a bit more depth. Vegetation in Need for Speed seems to look better overall, thanks to the increased LOD and better lighting effects. The Crew 2 suffers some major problems with its low LOD, which can likely be attributed to the game's significantly larger size. However, just like the road textures, we can see that the Crew 2 has an upper hand when it comes to the textures on some of the larger vegetation like basic trees. Next, let's look at a few environmental objects. Both games feature some very low resolution, low polygon environmental objects. And based on these examples, it looks like the Crew 2 looks a bit better. Character models on the side of the road are lackluster in both games, though it is interesting to note that the pedestrians in The Crew 2 are more accessible, as they walk around the world and cross streets as you're racing. Need for Speed, however, locks its pedestrians behind barriers that can't be accessed by the player, which helps to minimize the chances of a player seeing the low polygon models. Now, let's take a moment to compare the lighting effects used in both games. The lighting in The Crew 2 might be the biggest factor that seems to hurt its overall image quality. No matter what time of day I chose in The Crew 2, I could never get it to match the more realistic lighting on display in Need for Speed Payback. Both games feature decent God rays, but the overall color quality and image presentation seems to stand out better in Need for Speed. Both games feature reflective surfaces with a few minor issues. Need for Speed has some strange shader glitch that can be seen at sharp angles and really breaks the image, especially when combined with movement. The Crew 2's reflective surfaces don't have this issue as much, but the reflections are still very low res. Next up, we have various special effects. First, we have dirt accumulation. Both games feature this nice effect, and in different ways. In Need for Speed Payback, a very realistic texture will gradually appear along the body of the car that gives the impression that it's getting dirtier. It takes a long time to accumulate dirt, but it eventually coats the car and even the windshield in a noticeably thick layer of dirt. The Crew 2 isn't nearly as gradual. If you off-road for even a few seconds, your car will accumulate a large layer of thick mud and dirt. Keep in mind that I drove in what should be an identical environment in the outskirts of Las Vegas, Nevada. One effect that I thought was a nice touch in Need for Speed was its heat haze. You'll see a shimmering horizon in most of the large open desert areas of the game that really helps to drive home the idea that you're out in a very hot desert. The Crew 2 doesn't seem to have this feature at all. But the Crew 2 does feature significantly better weather effects, in that it actually has weather. Need for Speed never has any rain or snow. It makes sense considering the game's setting, but it's interesting to not see any type of puddles or water effects at all throughout the entire Need for Speed Payback world. Thanks to the ability to fly planes in The Crew 2, the clouds are volumetric and have real depth, whereas the clouds in Need for Speed are simply part of a skybox. Need for Speed has a much more complex damage model for all of its vehicles. But oddly enough, it takes a ton of hits to really bring out these cool looking damage effects. I had to smash my car multiple times in order to get some decent looking destruction. The vehicles in The Crew 2 damage much faster, but the effect is significantly limited to only a few scratches and some minor body deformation. And finally, let's listen to some sound comparisons. Which game do you guys think sounds the best? And so that wraps up this comparison. The Crew 2 manages to hold its own in quite a few categories, despite featuring a significantly larger open world. But Need for Speed still features much better lighting effects and significantly better damage effects. But what do you guys think? Which game do you think looks better? Let me know in the comment section, and if you haven't done so already, make sure to like and subscribe for more videos like this posted every week.